This last quote from this book says, "With the Lincoln Proclamation, Thanksgiving became a legal holiday on which the whole nation closes its shops, offices, schools, and banks, and offers its thanks to the deity for the blessings of this free and bountiful land." End of quote. It is, and was, and always was, from the beginning of the pilgrims coming over to this country, a religious festival. And there is absolutely, for those who are honest and who are willing to search what the truths are, it is very clear and plain that this is a religious festival established by religious people, established by a religious President of the United States who established it for religious purposes. I want to now read from a book called Organic Gardening and Farming, November 1975, page 132, article entitled Thanksgiving Day. Quote, "The day is fixed by proclamation of the President. It is an annual festival of thanks for the mercies of the closing year, celebrated by prayers and feasting. The earliest harvest Thanksgiving in this country was held by the Pilgrim Fathers at Plymouth Colony in 1621. But long before the Pilgrims held their first Thanksgiving dinner, harvest festivals were observed in this country. Among the North Dakota tribes, the corn spirit was known as the old woman who never dies. In Peru, the ancient Indians worshipped the mother of maize and tried every year to persuade her to bring in other good harvest. In Europe, the Austrians also had a corn mother doll fashioned from the last sheaf of grain cut in the field and then brought home to the village in the last wagon. In Upper Burma, the friends of the household are invited to the barn for a feast when the rice has been piled in its husks on the threshing floor. And then they offer a prayer to the father and mother. Then, much as we do, the entire party celebrates the year's harvest with a feast. There are, brethren, indications," end of quote, by the way, from that book. There are indications from books that the Indians of our early country, when invited to the Thanksgiving that was in 1621, thought they were coming to their pagan feast that they were used to keeping at that time of the year. And that is very true. It isn't just that there are indications. That is the fact. That is the truth. Recently, I was at a meeting, and at this meeting, one man was invited to speak who was a full-blooded Indian chief. Not only was he a full-blooded Indian chief, he was also very highly educated. He had worked for the U.S. government for many, many years. He was now retired. He was asked to speak to this large audience about Thanksgiving. He stood up there and he told those people, and I was part of this group, he told those people that the Indians had 5 festivals in the year, and he went through each one of them. And one of those festivals was the festival that they held at the time that the Pilgrims and the Indians got together in 1621 to keep a Thanksgiving festival. The Indians were already keeping that festival to whatever gods they were keeping it to. They were already doing it. And so it was not something unusual for them to come with the Pilgrims and to observe this festival of praise and worship to the spirit in the sky. And as we've already seen, these types of Thanksgiving festivals to pagan gods and deities goes back for, indeed, thousands of years. From the book, A Year of Festivals, A Guide to British Calendar Customs by Geoffrey Palmer and Noel Lloyd, 1972. Quote, Thanksgiving for the harvest is one of the oldest and most joyous festivals that man has created. That man has created. Going on, most of the pagan customs that gathered around the harvest season have either disappeared or have sunk under the weight of Christian disapproval and have radically changed. Today, the climax of the season is the picturesque but genteel harvest festival celebrated in churches. I grew up in England celebrating that harvest festival that the English in their churches celebrate. Well remember it. Well remember it indeed. Mr. Rittenbar later on in his sermon again said, weak religious overtones. Well, brethren, I hope that with the proof that I've given you here, that you will come to see that that is not correct. That it is far from having weak religious overtones. Maybe today, amongst the non-religious of our society, and remember that there are more non-religious than there are religious. So maybe among the non-religious, it is weak religious overtones. They don't think about it. It's just a time to get together with family and have a hoo-ha and have a feast. But the evidence that I presented to you clearly shows that it was originally far from having weak religious overtones. Then Mr. Rickenbaugh in another quotation says, if we eliminated Christian practice and belief on the basis that there are similarities with paganism, do you realize that there would be precious little that we could celebrate? Do you know why, he says? Because Satan knew what the plan of God was. He led people to institute practices that were counterfeit of the reality. Brethren, is it the main part of our mind and religious experience to say, well, I've come to see a truth of God, maybe the truth regarding death, where we go to, when we die. I've come to see what God says here, and now I'd better search to find out if there's any tribe or any nation or any people somewhere else on the earth that maybe believes the same thing. And then if I find that there is a people somewhere in their pagan culture who believe that you simply sleep when you die and you don't really go anywhere, then if I can find that people, then maybe I should question about what God says over here in His Word. Maybe it isn't right because there's this pagan group over here that also believes the same thing. Are we to spend our time trying to do that kind of thing? Of course not, brethren. What does it matter what the pagans believe or what they have in their culture? Our time should be spent in searching what is the truth of God, irregardless as to what this other group over here believes, practices, or teaches. Our time should be spent in finding the truths of God, believing it, and living by it. Yes, Satan has, in many ways, counterfeited the things of God. But I ask you this question, because Mr. Rittenbar thinks that in many things, Satan came first. Long before, let me quote, long before the truth came along. Well, I disagree. I disagree with Mr. Rittenbar on that point. Which came first, brethren? The truths of God or the lies of Satan? I want to show you that the truths of God came first, and that Satan came second with his lies and his counterfeits. Genesis, the first chapter, verse 14. And God said, let there be light in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years. The Hebrew word for seasons is moed. It is the same Hebrew word that is used in Leviticus 23, verse 1. These are my feasts, my festivals, God says. It is the same Hebrew word moed. I want to quote you from Clark's Bible commentary, a Protestant minister of, what, a couple of 100 years ago this man lived. And I want you to notice this very good comment here that he gives on Genesis 1 verse 14 concerning this Hebrew word moed. For the determination of the times on which the sacred festivals should be held. In this sense, the word frequently occurs. And it was right that at the very opening of his revelation, God should inform man that there were certain festivals which should be annually celebrated to his glory. Now, how about that for a quotation from a Protestant minister? That God is telling us here that the signs, the heavens, the earth, the moon that he put in there were given for mankind to also tell when the festivals of God should be observed. Yes, some other scholars have done some in-depth research on this point, and there is a lot of proof that the festivals of God were from the beginning. From the beginning. Genesis 2, verses 1 to 3 show you that the Sabbath day was from the beginning. From the beginning. Genesis 4, verse 3 and 4. And in the process of time it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord, and Abel he also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof, and the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering. Animal sacrifices from the beginning. Genesis 14 and verse 20, where it shows that Abraham, he gave tithes of all to Melchizedek, the king of Salem. Tithing from the beginning. Genesis chapter 26 and verse 5. Notice this. God speaking and talking about Abraham and promising him certain things, says in verse 5 of Genesis 26, because that Abraham obeyed my voice, kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. God had more than just his 10 commandments from the beginning, brethren. God had his statutes and his laws, as well as his commandments. God's truth, I submit to you, God's commandments, his laws, and his statutes have been from the beginning.